Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
It's just, I feel that it was one of those first-gen devices that Apple they nailed it on. That there isn't anything about the hardware other than my batteries not enjoying life 6 years later, but that it was still just, it's a great design. It works well. It hasn't failed. I haven't had a single problem with this other than we mentioned with the smart keyboards and stuff. But I'm like, this thing is still trucking, and it's not showing any signs of, oh well, this is a little glitchy, so the screen's starting to go or something.
Welcome to another episode of iPad Pros. On this episode is Mark Crump, who is still using the original 12.9-inch iPad Pro from 2015 with 128 gigabytes of storage. We dive into what Mark uses the iPad Pro for and his upgrade approach to technology. When is it finally time to upgrade a tool that you depend on? If you've ever been tempted to upgrade when perhaps your old iPad can still do the job, this episode is for you. It was a lot of fun to recall back to what that first iPad Pro was in this episode. I, for instance, totally forgot that part of the tech that makes ProMotion work in the second generation and newer iPad Pros was in that first iPad Pro. That original iPad Pro can slow down the refresh rate to 24 frames a second for movies, or even slower if your iPad is, say, static. The part of ProMotion it can't do is ramp all the way up to 120 Hz. This episode was recorded before WWDC 2021, so we do mention briefly some hopes for iPadOS 15, but you'll know what actually happens when you hear this. Before we get to that interview, a quick reminder that you can support the podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros. For as little as $1 a month, you can get the episodes early and with embedded chapter markers. The higher tiers give you access to bonus shows like iPad Possibilities, iPad Ponderings, and iPad Historia. Learn more at patreon.com/iPadPros. You can also support the podcast simply by opening up the Apple Podcast app and leaving a review. Every review helps send the right signals to Apple to show this podcast more in search, helping new listeners discover the show. With that, here's my interview with Mark. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Hi, it's great to be here.
You as well. It's great to have you on. We've had a lot of back and forth on Twitter, and this episode I'm excited to share as kind of catharsis for people that aren't getting the new iPad Pro, and just this is an episode that you can listen to and appreciate what you have because it's amazing. All the iPad Pros are great. So in this episode, we're going back to the original iPad Pro released November of 2015. It was announced in September of 2015. And this was the first iPad Pro. This is the one you're still using.
Yep.
And we're going to kind of dive into the kind of work you do today on it. They're all great. And you don't need the latest and greatest to have a great iPad Pro experience.
No, it's still trucking along. I mean, the main reason I still use it is it still works. Patrick Rohn had a great podcast a long time ago with Mike Hurley. It's like sort of like the pre-relay, even pre-5x5 podcast, and it was called Enough. And they had a segment that's basically, well, how much is enough for you? And Patrick also used to write for the website Minimal Mac, and it was obviously in the name about minimalism in Mac. And he wrote a great post which I sent you the link to. It's like not for me or something, which is basically, hey, Apple came out with a bunch of new stuff and my old stuff still works. And I got the iPad Pro in February of 2016, and I had briefly bought what was the one that was before, like the Air 2 or whatever.
Yeah, the Air 2. That was the really overpowered one that was designed to show off multitasking, to have some kind of device that would enable that.
Yeah, so I had bought that in like November, and I was like, no, I don't need the Pro. The screen's huge. The thing weighs 1.5 pounds. That's the size of the original iPad. And then I kept looking at it, and I kept going, I want to get back into drawing again. And that pencil, like the pencil is what got me. It was that, and it was like this, the screen is massive. I remember when I got it, I brought it into work, and my boss at the time was just looking at it, and he was just like, what? And I'm like, yes, my iPad. And he's like, that's way too big. And of course, 3 months later, he had one. And, it was that and Procreate and just being able to, I went to architecture school. I don't practice it at all, but it's like, I just missed sketching and freehand drawing. And I was like, okay, well, now I can always have a sketchbook with me. And I bought that. And the closest think I probably came upgrading it was a 2018 that everybody was thrilled with because it had the USB-C ports, but I was still going, you know what, this thing is still working. And the primary apps I use are, the handful of social media apps, Tweetbot, Discord, Slack, Reader and all those, and Ulysses and Procreate. And I don't do any video editing with LumaFusion or anything where I look at, well, these are some serious, speed increases that come with if you're doing those heavy workflows. And the only two problems that I have with my Pro are the battery's kind of shot. I probably get 4 to 5 hours depending on what I'm doing. And it has hovered just above that 80% threshold where Apple will just let you replace the unit for $100.
Yeah.
And I do run into some RAM constraints, specifically with iBooks and some large PDF.
Okay.
Every now and then the iBooks will just crash out on me.
Yeah. What kind of PDFs are you importing into iBooks? Or Apple Books now, I guess it's called.
Mostly either board game. I'm really into board gaming and model trains. And so I will get magazines that are, well, here's, the latest model railroader or whatever. I'll make a copy of it locally and read it in there. Or I download a lot of the manuals, and they're all, a lot of them are just scans of the old Avalon Hill board games. So, you end up with these massive, uncompressed, touched by human hands sort of PDFs, and I'll be scrolling through it, or there's scans of magazines from board gaming magazines from the 70s that I downloaded off the web, and someone else could be scrolling through it, and just all of a sudden iBooks will just bomb out. And so what I started doing is just to bring the stuff back into Goodreader, which I think handles it slightly more efficiently. I don't think iBooks is really designed to go through life as the preview for the iPad.
Do you do any digitization, or are you downloading all of the stuff?
Yes, I have a scanner, and one of the railroads I model is the Erie Lackawanna, and there's a historical society. My dad used to call them the hysterical societies, which was also somewhat apt. And when he died, I got his entire collection of those magazines. And the one thing the iPad has really ruined me on is just reading a traditional magazine. I'm like, oh, that font's a little small. Why can't I zoom in? So I've been sitting here with a flatbed scanner, just scanning in the old magazines. So I have a digital copy so that I can, actually zoom in and read the type on.
Yeah, imagine magazines very thin, so document scanner might actually damage that material.
Yeah. So I just sit there with the flap. Yeah, same thing. It's it's a nice exercise. Just sort of sit there. It probably takes me 15 minutes to scan one in, and just lift them. And then the other app I use a lot is Ulysses. I do have my own website that I infrequently update, markcrump.com, and 98% of what I put up there comes through Ulysses, and the other 2% is either I go through these periods of self-evaluation where I'm like, well, do you really want to use Ulysses? Do you want to try another app like IA Writer or something? So I'll write a post and put it up there, and then still end up going, no, Ulysses just still works for me. And the only other thing I can't do in Ulysses to post up there is Ulysses still doesn't support tables. So if the blog post that I'm writing has a table, then I will use something like IA Writer to do it and have the table and then publish it from there.
Yeah. So you mentioned your boss got an iPad Pro. And what capacity do you use it at work? Is it kind of your companion note-taking assistant kind of device, or what role does it play for you at work?
I work for a hospital, so I can't connect any of my personal devices to the network.
Is your unit a LTE enabled
Nope.
Pro? It's not. Okay. Is that something you regret retroactively 6 years later?
No. The problem that I run into is I think that the iPad Files app it really wants you to continuously have a network connection.
Yeah.
And
there used to be a pinning feature that never came back from the betas.
I know. I was so disappointed. When that came out, I was like, yes, this is for that month, I was like, this is the best thing ever, because I could pin the thing, have it downloaded, and then it didn't matter if I was on or off the network. This is great. They took it out, and then I was like, okay, maybe it'll come back on iOS 14.
Yeah, surely at some point.
Right. And I'm like, apparently that was probably what was causing all those iCloud drive issues that they were having back then. So, and so that was so. But the rare times that I'm actually not on a Wi-Fi connection, I'll just usually just hotspot it off my phone or something. And the only times I really run into these problems are if I'm going into, like if I go into Boston for the day and I take the MBTA in, the line that I'm on has spotty Wi-Fi coverage with their onboard thing.
Yeah.
And because they use cell modems too. Usually, like if it's having a problem, my phone's going to have a problem anyway.
Right. Okay. So at the hospital, you kind of use it to reference different materials, PDFs, and take notes and things?
Mostly I'd take notes. Back in the before times when we had, in-person meetings, I would use GoodNotes and just take my digital notes. And then for work notes, I use OneNote because it is installed on my work laptop and I can just sync everything between them. And there's never anything in my notes that's, would be considered privileged information anyway. It's just my notes on, I work in project management, so it'll be like, add this requirement or do this thing or here's how this application works. So
okay.
I don't get any patient information ever with really anything in my job, thankfully.
How's the Apple Pencil's battery holding up these days?
Really good, actually.
Huh,
and even I keep mine chained to my iPad, so it never really goes into
rest mode.
A good rest space.
Yeah.
And looking at it now, it's at like, maybe a third full, and I haven't used it in a while, so it's been getting bounced around.
Yeah, it's super impressive after 6 years because it has like the tiny AirPod sized batteries in that thing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's impressive.
And I have 2 pencils, which helps too because I keep one in a charger. It's, my wife's also an artist, and we got her the iPad Pro and the digital pencil, and she just went, I can't do digital. I need my paper and my pencils. And so I ended up with 2 pencils, which is good.
Did you end up returning that second iPad Pro then?
No, she used it until it died.
Which was it original as well?
Yep, same with mine. And then just one day it just stopped turning on.
Huh.
Or got in some weird loop. It's sitting in a drawer next to me still, just in case I can coax it back.
Yeah, I've only had that happen with an original iPad that's sitting in my desk that I can't boot up, sadly.
Yeah. And at first she liked it because, she liked the big size and everything. And now we got a secondhand, just the first generation Air that she's using. And now she's kind of like, I like the small size and the small weight better.
No, the small size is nice for a lot of different situations, right?
Yeah, I think that the next iPad that I get is more likely than not to be a Pro, but I'll probably get the Air for a couple of reasons. The first is, it's the price, and I need to buy a new pencil and other stuff. And
the upgrade prices, there's a lot to it. Yeah. Pencil,
right.
Yeah.
And I can get it in blue. And I'm like, I wish that Apple would have the iPads that were, put those colors in the Pro line. If I could get a blue iPad Pro, I probably would. And I keep hoping that maybe this year's iPad Airs will do Face ID too, as well as get the M1 chip. Like if they put the M1 chip in Face ID in the regular Air, then that'll probably be getting close to the point where I'll just start pulling the trigger and getting one.
So at home, you mentioned you run Ulysses for the blog, and are you up to date? Are you using the subscription Ulysses?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I have the subscription. I got in on their original one, which was $25 a month, $25 a year.
Yeah.
And I'm going, that's basically lunch one day.
Right.
So.
And how are you using the smart keyboard with it? Because that's one thing that I was glad to finally upgrade, because my first gen smart keyboard frequently would just give me headaches of it. I'm at the wrong angle and not connecting anymore. How's that doing for you?
I had the exact same problem.
Okay.
I went through 2 of them.
Yeah.
And I loved the design.
Yeah.
Because it didn't add appreciable weight and thickness to the device. And, it was great. I just sit in a meeting and go, flip, boom, there's my keyboard. And I liked the fabric covering. It was a great keyboard. I went through one and they replaced it within warranty. And I went through the second one and didn't have the receipt from when they replaced it. And what I ended up getting was the laughably named Logitech Slim keyboard.
Yeah, because it's not very slim.
And I don't use that much. What I am starting to find now is that, I like the keyboard on it, but at that point, I have something that was closer to a MacBook Pro thickness and weight. And I'd have the keyboard that would just be sort of floating around. So if I'm working on my iPad, I usually am just using a virtual keyboard now. I gave up on the using a physical keyboard life.
Okay.
Because
At home, will you use a one thing I really liked doing when I was using the second gen iPad Pro while I waited for this new one to show up was external keyboard and the Magic Trackpad 2. It really transforms that iPad into almost a desktop environment.
Yeah, no, I still just use the virtual.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of it too is like, one of the themes I have too is like I just try to get down to the core of what the device is good for. And there was another thing I sent you a link on, I wrote a post.
Because this is not your sole computer. This serves
That's
a
right.
purpose in your life, a role in your both work and personal life, but you also have a Mac that serves a different role.
Right. And, this was that thing I sent you about, render onto the Caesar, and the iPad is, for me, like the iPad is really great as a tablet that I interact with the screen on. And if I need to write, say, a term paper on this, I may not use the iPad for it. That's when I might just say, let me just grab my Mac, because my M1 Air is not that much thicker now than my iPad. But if I want to work on the screen, I want to draw, the iPad Pro is like, it's got the regular sized keyboard and I can type decently on it.
Does Sidecar work well with that original Pro in your MacBook Air?
Oh, it works great.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was, there's the one thing with the Air that's a little frustrating is it only supports one external display. And there is like maybe once or twice a year, I need 3 displays. And what I did is I just had the 4K display that I use with the Air display, and then I sidecarded the third one to the Pro, and it works fantastic. And that's where I will end up using it for some of that stuff.
Okay. What was your configuration for your Pro? What color and storage did you end up? It was 32, 128, and 256?
Yeah, I got the space gray with the 128.
Okay.
And
the biggest mistake I made was I went 32 gigabytes because I just was I didn't have a lot to spare at the time.
Yeah.
And that just, when the second gen came out on my birthday in 2017, I immediately, okay, let me replace this thing, because it was aggravating, because I was trying to do a lot more than I could with that storage in there.
Yeah, I liked having the 128. I haven't ever really come close to filling it, but it's about half full now. Last time I checked, I had used 61 gig.
Yeah, because you're doing a lot of tech stuff with Ulysses, and then the art stuff and Procreate, I guess it's not like full out video, so take up that much, right?
No, it's probably my Overcast queue that's sucking up a good chunk of it too at this point.
It's funny with the 1 terabyte on this iPad Pro, I've occasionally had like, Overcast is 400 gigs. Let me clear this.
Yeah,
it can just accumulate. Yeah.
I used to listen to podcasts when I was commuting, and I've been very lucky that I've been able to work from home for the past year, and the detriment to that was my podcast queue is backed up like a bridge over going to the beach. And it was, I ended up having to make a lot of decisions about, okay, I have literally not listened to this podcast in months. Like, okay, it's time to just unsubscribe from it. And then I would find myself saying, all right, I need to go for a ride, because I was like, that was when I would be listening to a podcast.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, I have to go for an hour ride for something. What helped too is the most recent Apple thing I got too, which I really like, is I got just the regular AirPods, and they're everything that I hope for in a device, where I just wanted to be able to have something where I've got them in my ear, and without really touching anything, I can just switch which device I'm listening to.
Yeah.
And that is so worth it. It's like, okay.
Especially, I'm not sure if you're an Apple Watch user, but that works so well in the Apple Watch with before, it's like try to find and pick the device. But if you're listening to something, say you're in your car listening through your iPhone, and then you pop over and need to use the watch, it just instantly switches, and that's really great.
So staying consistent to my theme, I have the Series Zero watch.
That's just really impressive, because that thing, I remember just a couple of years ago when I got the Series 3, that was long in the tooth then, and it was barely making it through a day.
Yeah.
How's that thing treating you?
It barely makes it through a day, which isn't much worse than when I got it 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, the new ones I want to get a new one eventually because, with the EKG monitors and some of those things, I'm like, yeah, there's some tangible health benefits to getting this. But
the always on display really transformed how I use the watch in meaningful ways, I will say.
yeah, but it's also just one of those things. It's like, it's just, sort of right. It's like, I'll tell people, I'm like, yeah, I'm still using the Series Zero watch. And they're
Sure.
like, really? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, really? All I want to know is, have I walked 3 miles a day, get a text notification, and I use the timers feature a lot.
Yeah.
We just had a lawn put in, and so it's like I'll be going out and sprinkling, and like, okay, setting these timers every 20 minutes, go out and move the sprinklers, and those are the core uses I use it for.
Right.
And I go, okay, I can get the new watch, which is, it is better, but it's like this one, it still does what I need it to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about tech. If you ask of it what you originally asked of it, it mostly will do that unless you update the OS, where the OS isn't perhaps as graceful as it used to be on those older hardware. Apple does their best, but sometimes the old devices can be a bit forgotten. I will say the other big thing that transformed my use of Apple Watch was cellular with the Series 3. I would find myself and still do find myself just leave my phone behind, and I'm still connected and able to listen to stuff, and that's a really liberating sensation.
Yeah, that would be nice. But it's also like, it's an extra payment each month for
Yep,
the
extra
$10 plan, and it is it's just, I do get a kind of self little kick out of it, because it's like I probably the most recent thing I own other than my M1 Air is I have I got the iPhone 8 Plus when it came out, so I still using the 8 Plus.
Yeah.
And
I upgraded from the SE, so I had a 6S generation phone, so I went a while before I got a new phone this time.
And the thing for me with that is, it's going to be probably the cameras in the new ones coming out, because it's my principal photography device at this point.
Yeah, and that 12 mini, it's remarkable what kind of stuff it captures.
Yeah, Apple does great with cameras. It's it's not going to be the same though. It's like with how Phil up there talking about photography, because Jaws, I don't think quite has that same passion for it. But
yeah,
so it's actually kind of funny. Speaking of Phil, I came 4 years away. If I was born 4 years earlier, I would have grown up with him.
Same high school or whatever you mean?
Yeah, he was born in the town that I grew up in. And I'll look at it, I'm like, wow, that's really funny that, because I grew up in Natick, Massachusetts, which is also, we're really famous for Doug Flutie. But,
yeah,
I'm like, hey, Apple, Phil Schilder grew up in here.
Yeah. So how is the iPad Pro first gen OS-wise behaving these days? It launched with iOS 9, and we're now at the iOS 14, soon iOS 15. And how's it treating you?
Fine. And it's one of those things. It's like, I don't think that, I think if I sat down with your iPad Pro for 10 minutes, I'd be like, oh, this thing is slow. But without having a base point, I'll open up Ulysses, and it's still pretty much an instantaneous load. And let me see how it is when I force quit it. It takes maybe 5 or 6 seconds to load, which isn't unbearable. And it's fine. Some people, there's a forum I'm on, and I'll mention, this thing is still just trucking along. I still don't really feel hardware constrained with it. And, you end up with the virtual second looks on it. And I'm like, I surf the web, do Twitter, and use Ulysses. I'm like, this isn't really resource intensive.
Yeah. Now, one of the biggest jumps for me was, my favorite jumps, I should say, was first the second gen iPad Pro. Because the screen's the thing you're interacting with all day long. And that second gen, it added True Tone, ProMotion, it just was such a oh, this is just lovely. Once I had True Tone, it's like, oh, this is, it is nice. You wouldn't notice, and if you never had that jump. And ProMotion as well was another thing, was like, oh, this is what iPad Pros should be, because you're interacting with the screen and all the screen enhancements. And again, with this 5th gen, another screen update, and the screen, I'm realizing that's the most important thing about an iPad and what makes it so special.
Yeah, the ProMotion is probably something that if I would probably get me to want to switch. The color stuff, not so much. I'm colorblind, so getting into the True Tone, I turn it on and off on my Mac depending on sort of my mood.
Mm-hmm.
And that. But like you look at things like, when they talk about, the P3 color gamut, I'm like, oh, geez, that's nice.
I can't see that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's more colors I can't see.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ProMotion is probably something like looking at this, it's, got mine sitting in front of me, and yeah, there's probably a very slight flicker that I'm detecting.
Yeah, something I didn't know until I did the research for this episode is I kind of forgot that original iPad Pro did the ramp up, ramp down thing that was kind of made famous with ProMotion, where it ramps up to 120 hertz. But instead, with the original iPad Pro, it could ramp down. So as you're watching videos in 24 frames a second, it could do that. Or if you're just static on a screen.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It actually ramps down. Phil Schiller explained that they use the same tech as they use in the 5K iMac to do this ramp up, ramp down. It just has a smaller range of ramp than the Pro display.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, this one they did so many with Apple and their iPad hardware, and especially now with the 2021, it's like it feels like they're moving like almost 2 to 3 years ahead of the software people.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I look at the Pro and I say, okay, there are frustrations that I have with iOS, mostly around the Files app and some other things that are not solved by a new iPad Pro. And we start talking about, everybody's saying, well, once they put the M1 chip in, well, that's going to mean that we're going to be able to do more with Mac stuff. And I'm like, maybe not. Maybe the Apple people, the hardware people just went, hey, we can do this, so we're going to do this. And I hope that this year's WWDC has a lot of iPad stuff. But it's still, it feels like a couple years ago when they came out with, hey, we're going to have iPad OS, and a lot of people got excited because like, okay, it's great. This means we're going to get meaningful updates every year instead of the, TikTok that we get. And then last year's was sort of like, no, even though it's iPad OS, you were still getting the TikTok.
Yeah, last year was interesting because the trackpad support, it wasn't part of 14, but it was last year. And that was like that one feature alone transformed radically how I use this device in huge ways that I've just changed it forever. I'm using it on a stand far away from me without touching it with the external trackpad and the Magic Keyboard. And that late addition to iPad OS 13 kind of felt like okay, we're good for the year, even though there were some things in 14. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with 15.
Yeah, the pointer stuff was interesting. It's great because it's, it's like you said, you can have the thing on an ergonomic stand and it's up and it's out of the way, and you can use it much more ergonomically than, the zombie arms where you're always reaching out and tapping with the screen. Being able to do that with the with the Magic Mouse and the trackpad, and then with the Magic Keyboard, it's neat. Like I think, I'm not sure if I'd get the Magic Keyboard with it because it's, I do sort of feel that, okay, if I'm going to go through all that, then I'll use my laptop. But having the pointer support is great because even if I'm just sitting here, like I haven't used it that much because I'll forget that it's there, and I'm like, well, if I got my iPad up and just sort of pushed out of the way, just being able to have the mouse pointer to point along to what I'm doing without reaching up to the screen would be great.
Yeah, and then kind of going back to the original iPad Pro, something that made the Pro were the 4 speakers, so that's something that we appreciate still today.
Yeah.
Those old Pros had a headphone jack, which I still miss to this day. So that's part of the reason I waited so long in my upgrade. I didn't get a 3rd gen iPad Pro. I waited until Magic Keyboard came out, and that was very enticing with that upgrade. And yeah, the headphone jack, it's a super reliable way to get audio out, and you don't have to deal with some finicky digital converter cable thing that can do it, but sometimes not as well. So, yeah, that was something I do still miss from that old iPad Pro. And Touch ID is still great. I mean, on Face ID, I think on the iPad's more appropriate, but Touch ID is really great, especially the way they implemented it on the Air, where you can have it in clamshell mode, completely closed, and the authentication, you can still touch it with a closed lid if you're using it, which is great.
Yeah, the problem I have with Touch ID is, with my model trains and stuff, I tend to get glue on my fingers a lot, which just really, like, they're all like super glues and stuff like that, and it's, I'll be sitting there and I'll be like, Touch ID is not working. Like, why isn't Touch ID working? And it's like, oh yeah, because you've got super glue stuck to your finger and your fingerprint's not reading the same.
Yeah, and I do miss the gold color option. That's what I always went with, and
Yep.
Now on the silver camp because that one looks better to me.
Yeah, I don't get why they don't have more color option. And I don't know if it's just that, I guess the iPad Pro sell a lot, but if they don't want to just keep getting, too many models out there. But I'm like, I'd like a blue iPad Pro.
Yeah, or like a product red iPad Pro. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's one I'm really surprised that they haven't done, because it's an easy to do technology-ish, I guess. I mean, says the guy who's never done it, but I'm assuming that it's not that much difficult than putting a special color on the back of an iPad Pro. I don't think is any more difficult than putting it on the back of an iPad Air.
Yeah, and price-wise, it's been gradually climbing over the years. And yeah, the original $799 starting price is now the starting price of the smaller iPad Pro. And the iPads, they have been getting, like, the tech in there is just getting crazier and crazier. So they're finding ways to justify it, I think. But still, it's a shame that people that don't want to spend as much don't have a lower cost option. I guess the Air is kind of the iPad Pro Lite at this point, right?
Yeah, well, the thing I like was they've put so many of what I consider to be sort of like the base iPad Pro stuff down onto the Air. You can use the Apple Pencil with
even the original, if you think about it, the Smart Keyboard and Apple Pencil, that's across the entire iPad line now, which back in 2015... we would have thought that was crazy because those were the differentiators of what makes a Pro.
Yeah, and the screen size between the Air and the Pro is very small, isn't it? It's like
0.1.
And of course you don't get the good display that you get on
you don't get ProMotion. That's the biggest sad thing about it. Like the 10.5-inch iPad Pro is one of my favorite small iPad Pros. And when they made the Air version of that, they got rid of ProMotion. It's like, oh. Yeah.
But then it's like, I know that what's probably going to happen is I'm probably going to go look and see the Liquid Crystal XDR type display and just go, oh my. But yeah, it's like that one starts at like, what, $1,000?
Yeah, 1,100. And it's, is it 128? Yeah, so the starting storage is 128, which is a lot better than the old 32 gigabyte. That was not
that was a hate crime.
That was just not nice. And yeah, I mean, I'm using dark mode all day long now because the blacks just look so good.
It does. Then you look at the price of the 2 terabyte. Oh, that's real money.
And it's amazing it can go up to 2 terabytes as a thing, because they used to top out at 256 as the top capacity before. And if you can configure it the same way you do a MacBook Air, if you jump up to the 1 terabyte, you're paying $200 for the RAM and also $200 for the storage. So it looks like a lot more for just an SSD upgrade, but they're also charging for the RAM that's kind of hidden into the price.
Yeah, I am curious to see what Apple does with all of that extra RAM. And I hope it's not them saying, hey, it was just as easy to just take this exact same chip from the Air and put it into the iPad. That they have a vision for why we're not just going to use like an A whatever X. And it might just be that we don't need to make one chip, we're going to put it in there, and as a result of it we're able to do all this. But
yeah, I mean, by the time this episode's released, people will probably know it's an iPad OS 15, but I have to just guess external monitor support and a new way of multitasking will make that RAM more important.
Yeah, I was listening to Jason. I'm a member of Jason Snell's 6 Color site, and on his members only podcast, he hinted that on his background briefing that he had with Apple that they mentioned multitasking a lot.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where, especially when they got the same Thunderbolt ports and everything, I am hoping that it's true external display, that you're not getting that letterboxing or pillar boxing that they call it, and that now you can start moving windows around. Like I don't think that Apple should, or I want them to say, if somebody wrote that post once they came out with the M1, that's like, we'll just put Mac OS on it, you cowards.
Yeah, that would kill the iPad platform as we know it.
Yeah. And it's, no. But what I would like is apps that are on the Mac that are fully featured and the iPad versions aren't, like Word. Yep. And I don't want it to do, I don't care about, VB macros and those things, but it still pains me that I can't edit a style on Word on the iPad.
Right.
I can't just insert the table of contents. That in some ways, Pages is is a better platform for that because I can make those changes. And so if with the M1 chip and where that you can do they have the universal chip, I'm hoping that the universal binaries, I'm hoping that with they'll maybe be able to say, okay, these Mac apps you can, that we have these sort of a sidecar iPad version on, maybe this will now be a much more fully version, and maybe it'll save them some development time for that.
Sure. Yeah. So regarding the original iPad Pro in 2021, any kind of final thoughts regarding kind of your usage of it and how you see it in the world today?
I obviously still like it quite a bit. And I think it's one that I have a lot of sentimental attachment to it because I've had it for so long. The back is all scuffed and scratched and everything. And I still think it's a great iPad. It's one that I still enjoy using every day, and there are times where I will just say, okay, I'm going to go out to the patio and do some stuff, and I will grab the iPad Pro and go out there. And it's just, I feel that it was one of those first gen devices that Apple they nailed it on. Mm-hmm. That there isn't anything about the hardware other than my batteries not enjoying life 6 years later, but that it was still just, it's a great design. It works well. It hasn't failed. I haven't had a single problem with this other than we mentioned with the smart keyboards and stuff. But I'm like, this thing is still trucking, and it's not showing any signs of, oh well, this is a little glitchy, so the screen's starting to go or something. I like it, and it for a while I did give going iPad only a solid effort, and I loved using it. It was it was nice too because it had the screen of an iPad Air, but Retina at the time. And it was just that almost 13-inch screen is still just, it's amazing. Like I look down at it and I'm like, you're able to get this in. And, I remember I had was it the iPad 3 that was the first one with Retina, and the chip couldn't really power it, and it just overheated. It was this one, it was like they threw this massive 13-inch screen on here, and it's held up. I love it.
That's great, yeah. The display on that original one, or that original generation 1 and 2, I think the Logitech charging stand that I really love, that's the stand that you can charge over the smart connector, and it's such a clean setup. Just popping your iPad down in front of you, and it's charging you have an external track, keyboard in front of you. Love that as a setup. But I think charging through that over as long as I did, I think the LEDs near the smart connector kind of didn't like it too much. So there was a little bit of kind of white discoloration down there. That's the only kind of hardware glitches I had with the actual iPad itself. Oh,
the other thing I liked with this one, that was the first one they introduced, was fast charging.
Yeah.
Where if you had the big USB brick, I remember going out and getting the 30 watt or whatever it was. 'Cause it was funny. There was a Mac Rumors discussion post where people who are good at math and electronics were saying, okay, this is the one that you want to get because actually, like, you would think that if you just got the 47 watt that was, from one of MacBook Pros or whatever, that would work. And it was like, no, it's not. You need one that has a specific voltage output or something. And so I got the one that was right for that. And it was like, this is great. Like, I could charge my entire iPad up in almost an hour.
Yeah, it's funny, the Magic Keyboard, there's like one or two chargers that will charge your iPad drastically faster than every other charger, even these big ones. So, like, I think the one that ships now with iPads, their new 20-watt one, is that charger. And if you use other ones, it won't behave quite as nicely to charge your iPad as fast. So, yeah, it's kind of funny, the finickiness of what charger and amperage make all that stuff work well.
And it's not easy to read what the charger capacity is, because they all sort of look the same. I've got a magnifying lamp I use for my trains, and sometimes I just put it under like, okay, yep, this is the right one.
Yeah. No, it can be confusing, yeah. So anything else? Any apps that you haven't mentioned that you kind of like to use?
I'll infrequently play some games on it, but you know what I use a lot too is I use the Zinio app because I'll buy digital versions of some of the magazines.
Yeah.
And I use Libby, which is my library thing, because I used to have a News Plus subscription, and then I found out that every one of the magazines I was enjoying reading on News Plus I could get from my library digitally for free.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's great, and it works out. It works really well, and so I use Libby a lot to read my library magazines on it. Those are probably the big ones I use. I use Reader for my news RSS feed, Tweetbot. Oh, I use Things for we didn't even get into it feels like there's a union role to talk about task management.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I use Things. For a while I went to Reminders just because I like to try to go first party as possible, and then Chris Lawley had a great video about a month ago, and I had completely not realized that I could set up what they call areas, and I'm like, oh, I could just dump all of this work stuff up into an area and have separate projects related to that. And after that I went right back to using Things, and everything that I need to track on here in my life is in here. If I have a task for work, it goes in there. I will set up reminders through there that, like, if I need to go out and water the lawn in the morning, make sure we have a cat that's got high blood pressure, so she's on high blood pressure pills. Make sure we give her pill at 5. Everything in there is I use the recurring tasks a lot, and just have it set for reminders, so I get the pop up on all my devices that says here's where go give Megan her shot, her pill, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah. For project management stuff, do you use OmniPlan or anything like that? Like work computers, like is it Visio? Microsoft Visio, I think, is the Microsoft version.
Yeah, I don't use any of those. Everything at work is on our work laptops anyway.
Right.
I infrequently I have OmniGraffle and I use it sometimes. I also have the AutoCAD app for my iPad, I was disappointed when I first started using it because basically what I wanted was AutoCAD on my iPad.
Sure.
And then it's geared more for if you're on a construction site, you can bring up the AutoCAD drawing and look at something and make some notes on stuff and double check some measurements. And now looking back on it, I say, you know what, that's the right approach to take, because running AutoCAD on an iPad, even with all the RAM and everything, it's a beast of an app, and it has an entire command line interface that I use. I don't use any of the menus. I'll just type in, if I need to draw a line, I just type in line. Yeah. And do all that. So as much as I wish that it did more, I'm going to this makes sense for what they needed to do.
Have you played around with Shaper 3D at all?
A little bit.
It's a different approach. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do have OmniGraffle, and I kind of need to remember sometimes that I've got it, because it does do some level of real world architectural dimensioning, I think.
Yeah, it's a handy app. It's like there's a lot of uses for you, just to have the imagination for what to use it for, kind of thing.
Yeah, and the main thing, because I could use OmniGraffle for a lot of the drawings I do for the trains. But what I'll do is I will plot them out at the scale of the train. So if I have a building that's 60 feet long and I tell it to print it, it prints out in HO scale at whatever 60 feet is. And I don't know if I can do something like that on OmniGraffle.
Right. Well, anything else before we wrap it up?
Nope, that sounds great. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Absolutely. So where can people find your websites and kind of what you're up to?
I am on, my website is markcrump.com, and on Twitter I am at Crumpy, CRUMPY.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. I really appreciate this chat.
Right,
this was a lot of fun, kind of taking a trip back memory lane and, your current times of what it's like in 2021 with this original iPad Pro.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Well, that was my interview with Mark. My thanks to Mark for his time recording this episode, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. Once again, you can get the episodes early and with embedded chapter markers for just $1 a month at patreon.com/iPadPros. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to everyone again real soon.